Well, I've been sent many videos over the years, but I got this one about 24 times yesterday, so let's get into it.
As they began to lay down the casket, the platform above the burial site collapses, sending the men plunging into the burial hole.
And first things first, I just want to say my heart goes out to that family. I can't imagine losing your loved one, and then during the grieving process having to go through an ordeal like that. You know, the loss of someone we love is something that, you know, it's a shared grief. Everybody has had their own experience, or most people have had an experience where they've lost a loved one and attended a funeral of some kind. And everyone knows how hard that can be, especially how close you were to them. And to have something that tragic happen, I'm just going to say a prayer for that family, and if you would too, that'd be great. But let's get into what actually happened and how situations like that can be avoided in the future through vault companies, through cemetery crews, and through my videos, trying to show people how you can make things safe at the graveside to avoid catastrophic situations like we just saw here today. Now, I've watched the video quite a few times, and I'll first start off with what we don't know. I don't know if that grave had caved in a number of times before they set the lowering device on top of their platform. I don't know if that was a double depth grave or a double depth lawn crypt, or if that was a green burial with no vault at all. I don't know if that was a vault company or a cemetery crew that made that setup. And I'm sure that that vault company or that cemetery crew is going through all types of grief right now, and I will try not to badmouth them as much as possible, because no one has a perfectly clean record in this line of work. Mistakes are made, but situations like that, everything should be done to avoid those. And obviously all the steps were not taken. And I don't know, I would have to assume it wasn't a vault company, because the vault wasn't displayed. The platform wasn't set up for a burial vault. If there was a vault, it was in the bottom of the grave already, and that soil was not the best type of soil to do an above ground Wilbert Way style of setup. What we do know is that it was not a Wilbert Ultimate Service Provider, such as my company that I work for, and we do know that they do not set up the Wilbert Way in any way, shape, or form because of that platform that was built. You know, I see it in video games. In a certain Call of Duty, there was a military funeral, and they had the lowering device laying on the ground. In all the movies where there's a funeral taking place, it's always the same thing. It's just a grave, lowering device directly on the ground. One thing they never show is the pallbearers placing the casket. It's always the casket already on the lowering device. And people don't realize, if you haven't been to one of these services with the device on the ground, just how difficult it is as pallbearers to place the casket on the lowering device. Now, with the equipment you see here for this tragedies, this is what's referred to as swinging a burial vault. It's also known as the Wilbert Way. So this is the gold standard of how to set up a committal service, because of what I mentioned about the lowering device being on the ground. That's asking for a disaster like we saw in this video. And of course, the main issue in this situation was having plywood over an open grave. Now, if that grave had caved in so substantially that plywood was needed all around both sides of the grave, that grave wasn't safe. In a situation like that, we don't allow for a Wilbert Way setup, and we don't allow to set the vault over the grave and the device over the grave. The actual sealing of the vault will be done off to the side, and then a platform stable enough to support equipment will be used to lower the vault with the casket already inside and sealed into that grave. Now, I pride myself on setting up over caved in graves quite often, because if it just caved in like you can see here today in this little clip from when I got here, and unfortunately cave-ins are quite common. The same day that I'm making this video, I had a cave-in because of the burial vault next to the vault that I'm installing today is a tragedies, and the top of these vaults are that simulated granite, and it's very slick, and it is common for the grave next door to have the soil on top of the lid slide off and into the grave. Typically, if it's a small cave-in like this, the dirt can just be leveled out at the bottom. But as you can see in that video, I believe that was an extremely sandy cemetery, and as soon as you dig the grave, the walls want to start moving in to where there's no pressure in the center, especially if the ground is saturated, that ground just turns into mush and fills in the grave. Which is why you see a lot of St. cemeteries using grave boxes to be placed in the grave once it's dug, and then the walls have the freedom to cave in as much as they would like, and there's no risk of the grave filling up with soil because those walls of the grave box are keeping it from filling in, which allows us to safely set the vault over the grave. Cave-ins are extremely common, and it's something that we're used to working around. And if they're not very drastic at all, if it's just a little cave-in like today, that's something that can be worked around and the grave can be completely safe. But in a situation where you've got cave-ins on both sides, enough to where people can fall through plywood into an open grave where it's caved in, that's a safety hazard for us to work around. That's a safety hazard for the pallbearers. It's just a safety hazard all around, and we can't control Mother Nature as vaultmen or cemetery crews, or we can't control the elements. We can't control the grave walls from caving in. We can't control the grave filling up with water, although it is pumped. 99% of grave diggers always have a pump with them, and we pump the water out as the vault is being lowered. I've said it before, but I'll keep saying it because a lot of my videos you can see water in the grave, and there's a reason why the water's there at the beginning of the setup. If you pump that water out, it releases the pressure that that water's putting on the grave walls, and that can cause the walls to loosen and fall in, which makes it to the point where the vault can't sit flush to the bottom of the grave. So the vault needs to be taken out, the water pumped out, the grave redug, and then the vault set back down into the grave. If you leave the water until it's time to lower the vault, I can begin lowering the vault as the grave diggers pump the water out. What this does is allows the vault to go down as the water is being pumped. And if those grave walls loosen up and collapse, they collapse against the sides of the vault as it's going down, rather than collapsing underneath the vault, causing the grave to be redug. Now, no grave diggers around here will allow the vault to sit in water and begin filling it. And there's a reason for that. One, it's pride in their work. They all take pride in their work around my area. And two, it's going to cause more problems for them in the future. Now, these grave diggers don't just come in, dig the grave, fill the grave, and leave. They also come back to top fill the grave when it starts to settle. They also come back to seed and level. They take care of the cemeteries. They take care of the graves in this way. So they don't want to cause more work for themselves. And if you leave a vault floating, because it will, it's lined and sealed, even though it's a 2,000, 3,000 pound burial vault, it will float in the water because of the seal. So if you leave it floating and then begin to push dirt on top, it'll run over the sides underneath the vault and leave a bunch of gaps underneath the vault. And over time, those gaps will start to fill in with soil. As the rain comes and as it begins to settle, it'll fill those spaces in, and that grave digger is going to have to come back over and over again to keep topping off that grave when it settles. I do my best to make videos of showing the water being pumped out of the grave, but sometimes the funeral director is ready for us to do our job so they can move on to the next thing they need to do. The grave diggers are ready to move on, and I'm ready to do my work as well, so I don't always record that process. And I work 50 to 60 hours a week alone at this job, not counting any of the YouTube or TikTok things that I do. So I don't always record everything. And obviously if there's family around and I'm lowering the vault and they're pumping the vault and they're pumping the grave as I'm lowering, I'm not going to record if family's around. That's not something that I do. So back to the fact of the matter, the platform around the grave. Now, I've built up platforms over caved in graves before. We use aluminum boards in my ramps for my hilljoy that support the weight of a burial vault. There are times where we will build up a platform over a caved in area. One thing that I like to do is put the lid over the caved in area because there's no weight underneath this side, obviously. So if it was caved in 3 feet under the dirt pile on this side, it would be no problem to build a little platform and keep the vault lid over the top, because no one's going to be able to fall in underneath of a lid. That's one of the reasons I'm here, is for safety, to make sure that nobody's children are climbing around underneath the lid, or nobody's trying to get underneath the lid for any reason. Making sure that if something is unsafe, that I'm up here and able to give that information to people. If it's too unsafe, we don't have the committal service at the graveside. I know I've said a million times before, but safety is our number one concern at the graveside for the family. And another major problem that I explained with the lowering device being on the ground is when you have a vault swung and suspended above the grave in this manner with the proper style of lowering device, the family never needs to straddle both sides of the grave. Now, in that video, you can see this whole platform would be over the top of that caved in area, but with how far and how wide that grave was dug, it had to have caved in multiple times, which means even outside in front of this platform would have all been caved in as well. And this is where they had all that plywood with just a couple of small boards supporting the lowering device. Now, if you've been a pallbearer at a service, you know that an average individual weighs between 150 to 250 pounds. And you add the weight of the casket onto that, which could be anywhere from 150 to 350 pounds. You'll have to fact check me on that. I'm not too experienced with knowing the weights of caskets, but I handle them every day. I know that the solid wood caskets are extremely heavy, and some of the heavier gauge steel caskets are extremely heavy as well. You add all that weight of 6 to 8 grown men, as well as a casket and our loved one around the edges of a grave, that's a dangerous situation. The pallbearers will come through the tent and line up with the end of the vault. Now, if the grave was unsafe at this end, we'd come in from the other side, or I would build a platform with my ramps or aluminum boards, add enough stabilization away from the cave-in to where I could jump up and down on it before the family gets here and not worry that the grave's going to cave in any farther. Now, we're safe on this side of the grave today, so the pallbearers are going to walk in, 3 on each side. They will set the casket on this first roller, and that's as far as the pallbearers need to go. They don't have to step over this rail and get in between the lid and the base, or risk having to walk up on that platform and anyone tripping. They simply walk up to the end, the casket is placed on the device, and as a vault man, I'm here waiting for the pallbearers so I can grab onto the end handle and guide the casket across while the pallbearers feed the casket hand over hand, and it glides right up the guide rails and over the second strap, safe and sound, to where the pallbearers don't even need to straddle the grave. Now, as a vault company, we are fairly blessed. We have dozens of funeral homes, and we have the financial ability to be able to purchase equipment like this and to be able to do this style of setup on every service. Even if it's not a full committal, we still swing the vault. That way it's safe above the grave. Now, if you don't have that ability, if you were a small cemetery, what I assume in this situation is that the cemetery handles everything, whether there be a vault or not. They set up the graveside, they use the lowering device, and they may not be as trained or as informed about this equipment as a burial vault guy working for a Wilbert, Trigard, or Doric vault company would be. Now, if that's the case, if I was employed there, I'd be using even more caution when it comes to the graveside, knowing I don't have the proper equipment to do the job. In this situation, the cave-in that substantially bad, and knowing that the lowering device is going to have to be on the ground, I would have refused to do an over-the-grave setup for that. The vault or the casket would have been set off to the side of the grave, close enough to where the family can still see, close enough to where everything feels intimate like a graveside should, but not next to something as dangerous as that grave appeared to be. And as a vault man, having a situation like that occur on one of my committals would be my absolute worst nightmare. Literally had nightmares about something like that happening, because I don't want anyone to get hurt. I don't want anyone's memory of their loved one's funeral to be tainted with a disaster caused by an individual working in the industry such as myself. And I don't want to give the family any more grief than they're already going through the grieving process. Like I said, I don't want to dog on the cemetery or the vault company that manage that service, but I just want to reiterate and continue making videos like this to try to help vaultmen, to see how it's done in different regions of the U.S., to see how other vault companies set things up, to give tips and tricks on safety and on situations, and just avoid having anything like this happen to a family as much as possible. And like I said before, if you feel so inclined, if it's in your personality to do so, please say a prayer for that family, for everything they're going through right now. And to all the vaultmen and cemetery guys out there, I answer questions all the time on here, on YouTube, on TikTok, even on Facebook, even though somebody on Facebook is stealing all my videos. Somebody named Austin Edwards. It's not me, he's just copying all my stuff. But either way, if you have any questions, I have an email. You can send me a DM on Facebook. You can send me a message on TikTok and email at Illianaheadstonecare@gmail. If you have any questions about different types of setups, how to do different things, where to get equipment, I've got all the knowledge, and I'm not gatekeeping anything about this line of work. I'm trying to share as much information as possible about the burial vault industry and a little bit about the funeral industry, as much as I know and feel comfortable sharing with my level of knowledge. So I just want to say, don't hesitate to reach out. The guys at the cemetery want to reach out and ask me how I set my platform up in those situations. I could give them some advice. If they would have sent me a picture of that grave beforehand and said, hey, how do I set up over this? Maybe I could have convinced them to do a false setup, do something safely away from the grave, but do something to where the family can still see the interment process after the committal service, if possible, which it is possible. They could have done a false set just off to the side, sealed the vault, or use their equipment to lower the casket to keep everyone away from the edges of that unsafe grave. Because unfortunately, sometimes Mother Nature won't allow us to do everything that we want to do to provide the service that the family deserves. But safety becomes the main factor at that. So I hope that gave you some information. I'm going to get everything wiped down and swept up. Got a committal service coming here in about 30 minutes. Take care, everybody. God bless.